Hello students and welcome to week 5. Week 5 is an exciting week because instead of having an online activity or discussion post, we have the first exam. And so if you take a look at the syllabus, you'll see that we have 3 exams for the semester. The first one is in week 5, the second is in week 10, and the third is the very final week of the semester, which is technically week 16 because of Thanksgiving break. In order to prepare for the exam, I have posted exam study guides. All of the questions for the exam will be multiple choice and they will be taken from that study guide. And so if you study that study guide, you will be in great shape. Make sure that you have read the chapter so you have a general understanding of the content, but also make sure you're checking out those PowerPoints that I've been posting for each chapter. They if you're having some trouble navigating Blackboard, I tried to make it really easy. If you just go to the content section, it lists all of the weeks. You click on the week. It does have like information on the week there, but if you click on the folder, it opens up. It gives you a great introduction of each chapter. It gives you the discussion questions, the additional reading, the websites, and then it has all of the content for the week, which includes a PowerPoint for each chapter. So make sure you're checking all of those out. The first exam will cover chapters 1 through 5. And so this chapter that you're going to be reading this week will be included in the exam. And so it's very important to make sure that you take a look at chapter 5 as well as you prepare for the exam. So any questions on that, please let me know. It is a timed exam, but I give you 2.5 hours, which is more than enough time to complete the exam. What else? You only have 1 attempt, so when you sit down to start the exam and take it, make sure you have plenty of time to complete it because that will count as your 1 attempt. All right, so getting into chapter 5. So chapter 5 is on human service boundaries, looking at special populations and special systems. And so there's a number of different directions this chapter is going to take us. Some of the questions to consider as you start reading the chapter is what special populations and service systems fall within the boundaries of human services, and so it may not be all that you think. Why are children particularly at risk for the development of problems? Why are older people at risk for the development of problems? How serious a problem is drug abuse basically in our society? What types of human service programs are available for those who are mentally retarded? What service systems are available for people with mental health problems? What are the goals of the correctional system in dealing with criminal offenders? And how does poverty relate to human service problems? So based on those questions, you can tell what special populations and special systems we're going to be looking at for this chapter. So like I said, it's a number of different ones, and that only gives you sort of a brief introduction in working with those different populations. So again, the chapter starts off with a little bit of a case study for you to think about as you get started. The introduction of the chapter just kind of talks a little bit again about the history of community agencies and how we got to the point we're at now. Just talking about the broad range of people that human service providers might be providing to. It talks about how disadvantaged people or people with severe problems were kind of excluded from community life, and even throughout our history were institutionalized, and it led to a lot of chronic and ongoing issues that may not have been there initially because of the treatment that they received. So it kind of talks about how things are starting to change, and obviously we moved away from institutionalism, but there continues to be like group homes and different kinds of services that could be there for populations that maybe once were kind of cast out of society. So once it gets past the introduction and a little bit of the history, it gets into those specialized populations. And so the first one it starts off with is children and adolescents. It talks a little bit about the developmental process of young people and why it makes sense that they are particularly vulnerable to have special needs and unfortunately develop psychological problems. All right, and so one of the other issues when you think about children and specifically adolescents, teenagers, is runaways, and sometimes runaways are individuals who have left the home due to different circumstances, potentially relationship problems with parents or other family members. It could be related to other, mental health issues. It could also be that the children or adolescents were forced out of the household. Perhaps they had an affectional or gender identity that the family didn't agree with, and they were forced to leave because of that. And so this is an ongoing issue. Homelessness of children is also a growing problem. One of the largest growing populations of homeless are young families. So typically it's single mothers with children. And so this has become an ongoing problem. And even though, literally living on the streets is the case with many people, sometimes it looks like living in a car or kind of couch surfing from home to home and not really having a stable place to live. And all of those things have an impact, whether it looks like our traditional idea of homelessness or not. So equally important are the children who are spending their childhood in disadvantaged environments. And so neighborhoods and communities that just don't have the resources that they need, communities that don't have access to playgrounds or after school clubs or, even libraries or sports activities, or, it's just simply dangerous, that there's, a lot of crime and isn't safe for those individuals. And so there could be potential issues there. There's also an increased risk of disturbed functioning faced by children and adolescents from all levels of society that leads to the development of human service programs. And so some of the things that have been a focus to help mitigate this in some ways is having well child clinics. And so, the idea that you don't just go to the doctor when you're sick, but having clinics that actually see the children when they're well, so that they can continue to focus on that wellness and help take care of their physical well-being and development. Another is education. So really focusing on, the obvious educational settings such as schools and making sure that they have the resources they need, but also what is needed in addition, Head Start programs or after school kind of club or recreational centers like, YMCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs and things like that, so that, young people have a place to go if their parents aren't home after they're done school. Also people to help mentor them, tutor them, or, help them with homework and stuff like that. And then finally, protective services. And a lot of times when people think of protective services, they think about, coming in due to neglect or child abuse and, tearing apart families and things like that. And in some cases, the children really do need a more structured home or a home environment that can be safe and healthy for them. However, protective services also helps with family reunification and keeping families together and getting them the support that they need. And so having these protective services get involved could help the family get the resources that they need, maybe things that they're not aware of or things that they haven't quite had access to, helping to bring those to families so that the families do have a greater chance of working together and supporting one another and staying together for the benefit of all involved. Then it goes on to talk a little bit about types of out-of-home placements when that occurs. There could be orphanages, kinship care, foster care, group homes, and residential treatment centers, depending on the needs of the individual. And then it brings into like this another case study on an individual that relates to those factors. Next, it gets into domestic abuse services, which obviously, we think of happening between a relationship between two individuals, but it also really has a strong impact on kids in many ways, because potentially they could be physically abused or, just have the psychological impacts of seeing the violence within their homes. It talks a little bit about the battered woman syndrome and, holding back any bias that we, may hold about, why didn't the woman leave, or why did they get themselves in those situations in the first place, and things like that, and understanding a more general picture of it, so that we're not just focused on what the victim may or may not have done, but also looking at the other circumstances that could be involved. Next, your chapter gets into problems and services for the elderly. As healthcare advances, we tend to live longer ages, or to more advanced ages, which sometimes increases the need for services for the elderly, because perhaps, maybe we're not able to do the things that we once were, and we need assistance to some degree, sometimes to an advanced degree. And also it increases the risk of developing different types of dementia, Alzheimer's, which then, of course, necessitates ongoing care and consistent care. And so obviously the human services field really needs to address that, find care that can be suitable for different individuals. Semi-connected to that is the fact that there is an increase in the numbers of elder abuse and neglect. And, sometimes this comes from the levels of frustration that caregivers might have. And so having that support can be really immensely helpful. But in addition, making sure that the services that are provided for the individuals are not abusive or neglectful in nature, and making sure that they're actually caring for the individuals that they're supposed to be caring for. While physical abuse, can occur, and neglect, you can sometimes see the signs of that. A lot of times there's levels of financial exploitation as well. And so because the individual needs someone to start caring for their finances, they may end up being at risk for being taken advantage of, and stuff like that. The next population or issue that's brought up is drug abuse, and it talks a little bit about the history of when different substances became more of an issue than others, and things like that. Many chemical substances have significant effects on human behavior, thinking processes, and emotions. And so because of that, it becomes a human services issue. So again, there is a long history of many of these, internationally and within our country. The most abused drug is alcohol. It is legal and pretty easy to access. And so it becomes a very large issue. Drug abuse, which is a serious problem in its own right, is also associated with a lot of the same problems that alcohol is, but there are also additional legal issues, because while there are certain circumstances that we could use alcohol in illegal places, or be publicly intoxicated, or drive while under the influence, most substances that would be misused are illegal just by their nature. And so, you could have legal issues just by having it, or testing positive for having used it, and things like that. The incidence of abuse of drugs tends to be higher in the urban disadvantaged communities, which kind of goes back to when we talked about, children and adolescents and issues they face, living in areas where drug abuse may be very high. Can have a strong impact. And chronic drug abuse has a variety of negative consequences depending on the particular substance used, obviously. There are sort of three main types of services available for substance users. One is a methadone maintenance program, which is typically used for those who have become addicted to heroin or other opiates. There's a lot of controversy surrounding methadone maintenance clinics for lots of reasons. Sometimes they don't allow individuals to step down as fast as maybe they could. In a lot of ways, people who are in those clinics, especially at higher doses, are unable to function in situations like being able to drive or hold a job, and there could be risks of childcare if they're using that, and still under the influence. And so While it can be helpful in some ways, there's a lot of controversy surrounding them. In addition, there's self-help programs. Very commonly known ones are like AA and NA, but there's also other recovery groups like Celebrate Recovery and Smart Recovery and things like that. And there could be other community programs as well. And then finally, the therapeutic community. So having both residential and outpatient or intensive outpatient services, therapeutic services for individuals who are struggling with either getting cleaner or maintaining sobriety. So the challenge for human services is to find effective approaches for dealing with addictions of all type and integrate approaches such as those self-help programs and kind of provide a wider network of support for individuals. The next category is services for mentally retarded people. I have some issues with using this term. Semi-surprised that the textbook is using the term retarded, because typically this is not an accepted term anymore. Usually we will use terms such as developmentally delayed or my mind's blanking on the other term. But we typically don't use MR anymore. We typically use DD, developmentally delayed. But anyway, you know, so I hope that having this term used in the textbook doesn't cause any discomfort or pain or anything like that. Again, I'm very surprised that the textbook is using that term. And so I'm probably going to use the term developmentally disabled, or DD, to refer to this. And, you know, just kind of know that that's how I'm relating it to the information in the textbook. So the majority of people who have developmental delays live in homes or often live in fairly independent community settings. Some may have issues that are a bit more severe as far as like intellectual levels and capability, and so they may need 24-hour residential care or, you know, day services and things like that. And so those are services that, you know, the human services field would need to provide or, you know, assist with finding for individuals. So they talk about 4 levels that are commonly described: mild, moderate, severe, and profound. And so this is a diagnosis within the DSM, which is used for the therapeutic community. And it does have that sort of range of scale, which is based mostly in IQ levels. And so they kind of have cutoff scores based on IQ levels. And it gives a little case study that helps to understand that. The incidence of severe and profound developmental delays is equivalent across socioeconomic levels, but individuals that are living in the lower socioeconomic classes or more disadvantaged socioeconomic statuses tend to have greater incidence of issues, right? Because maybe they don't have access to as much support or financial resources to get the support that they need. It talks a little bit about predisposition and whether it's like more organic causes or cultural family causes and things like that, and sort of the debate there. Let's see, program delivery systems have dramatically changed over the years. Again, we talked earlier about like institutionalization and how that has changed, and this is the same here, that often individuals with developmental delays were sort of like locked away in some sense. They kind of were a family secret or things like that, and that's changing. It kind of brings up my thought about this older movie called Rain Man, where essentially the individual's brother is locked away at this institution. And I think the premise of the story is that he didn't even remember that he had a brother, and the impact that that can have on people. So people in the past who were served for long periods of time in residential settings, often far from home, will now live and receive services right in their communities and stay close to family members, which is great. Life in group homes is believed to be a positive experience because it provides, you know, they use the term normal environment rather than an institutional setting. And there continues to be some prejudice against group homes from communities that find out a home is opened. And so this idea of like not in my backyard. And so this is true with homes for individuals who have developmental delays, but it's also true of like group homes for mentally ill individuals, for substance users who are trying to get clean, like those step down sober living homes, and also for offenders that are out on probation and are trying to turn their life around. There tends to be a lot of stigma about, I don't want this in my community, I don't want this in my neighborhood, things like that, which can cause difficulties in the human service profession trying to get people access to those services. Also, they talk about supported employment. And so those individuals who are able to work, how they can find jobs that are supportive of them and kind of give them opportunities to, be productive and make their own money and all of that. And then there's family support programs, again, to kind of help the family maintain connection there. The next section talks about mental health problems and service systems, which we've talked about already a little bit, but again, this deinstitutionalized nature. It talks about the not in my backyard, and trying to find services for chronically mentally ill individuals that aren't, the old-fashioned, outdated, like let's put them in, some kind of institution. It talks about the correctional system. Crime is a major problem in the United States, and there's a growing segment of the correctional population has been women. And so, how do we make sure that they're being taken care of in correctional systems, not being put in positions where they can be, abused or sexually assaulted. But also there are some factors that unfortunately have been debated about, which is, simple hygiene products for women, and when they're in the correctional system, what kind of access do they have for hygiene products, and how, they're given just materials to use that are just not what they need to be. And in some cases, money is taken out of their account for these products. And there's just a lot of issues there. Some prevention services include working with juvenile offenders to kind of get them off the route to heading towards more crimes and convictions and things like that as they get older. But also, I think prevention services can be working with individuals who are incarcerated so that when they're released, they have access to services that don't put them right back into the system. And so it talks about the rehabilitation of offenders. And it states that imprisonment has at least 3 goals: rehabilitation, punishment, and deterrence. Whether it's meeting all of these 3 things, I don't know, but it certainly is supposed to serve as a punishment for the crime and a deterrent from engaging in further crimes. And that rehabilitation piece needs to be an important part of that in order for those other things to work. And so how can the human services field get involved, especially because within most prisons, human services are relatively scarce and there's not a lot of funding put into them. And, caseworkers who might work in prisons are often overworked and overburdened with the number of individuals that they're serving. All right. Next, it talks about poverty as a common denominator. We've talked about socioeconomic status throughout a number of these, and the ways that high rates of poverty have a huge impact on children, have a high impact on marginalized ethnicities and races in this country, and the changes in family structure and how that has impacted poverty. Sort of the differences between, the working class poor and people who fall within the poverty line or below the poverty line, and how there are some individuals who are essentially really are working paycheck to paycheck. That paycheck comes in and right away it's off to bills and groceries, and there's nothing left to really sustain them until the next paycheck. And so it just kind of breaks down a little bit about some of the stereotypes and biases and beliefs that there might be about what poverty looks like. which directly relates to the next topic, homeless people, which again, we've talked about a little bit already, dispelling myths about what homelessness looks like, but also recognizing that the rates of homelessness have risen dramatically, that it is a chronic condition, that it is really hard to be able to, you know, get out of homelessness and stay out because of different systems and the way they're set up. There are definitely a number of social service, human services agencies and organizations that are working towards this, but you know, what else can we do to help prevent this problem and help deal with it? And again, you know, there's this increasing number of women and children who are becoming homeless. So these homeless families that need support and you know, have different additional challenges simply because they don't have a home address. Like even if they have a place to stay, you know, different nights moving from house to house or living in their car, they don't have that permanent address, and that ends up posing a difficulty. And so again, as we talked about, people who are homeless have high levels of disabilities, physical illnesses, mental health issues, and things like that. And so we need lots of different human services interventions to deal with the problems here. Again, it gets back into the topic of poverty and how that relates with homelessness. And then it talks about the multi-problem client and the recognition that often when clients come to our door, regardless of what specific job we have within human services, they often have more than one problem. It is very rare to find an individual who comes into our offices or organizations that only have one sole problem that needs to be addressed. And so how can human services workers really connect different support services and things like that so that we can give more holistic care and really address the multiple needs that individuals have, instead of just kind of focusing on one, because even if we sort of solve that problem, the other ones are going to prevent that problem from remaining solved for quite some time. And so that's kind of speaks to the chronic nature of some of these issues. And if we are able to more fully help individuals, there would be more likely to be successful as they move forward. So as always, your textbook has a wonderful summary at the end of it, recommended readings and internet sites, which again, I explained where that is on the content page. And then it has connecting with My Helping Lab. So if you have the My Helping Lab, you can go in there and engage in some of these activities that just enhance your learning. So that is it for chapter 5. Again, we have our quiz this week, our exam this week. And so if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. But you have the study guides, you have the PowerPoints, and you have your textbook all to study from. Again, all multiple choice, all taken directly from the study guide. So I think you guys will be great. Yeah, that's it for this week, and look for a video from me from next week. Thank you.